think we have an exciting topic for everybody today. Us at LandGate, we've been dealing with carbon credits for a couple years now, and it's fairly new to a lot of folks that have heard the term. And if you're in the real estate business, if you're in the land business, you've likely heard about carbon credits. And the reason that we're hosting this webinar here is to just get some more information out there. It's been a very, what I'd say, bottlenecked, constrained industry so far. And we have Steve Scholl here with us today, who has a very interesting new company that is kind of trailblazing the way things are done in the entire carbon credit process. So Steve's going to give us a really good background to that. But some quick housekeeping here. This is the same format webinar that we always do. This is going to be recorded, and at any point you guys can come back and find this recording. You're going to get it emailed to you from Jordan, but you can also find it on our website at landgate.com. Again, today, actually, before we talk about carbon credits, one more thing. This is an open forum webinar, so at any time you guys have questions, feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat, and we will address those in a timely fashion. So there you go. Thank you so much, Jordan. Jordan just put a link in the chat. You look at your screen, there's a little chat icon at the bottom. Jordan just put a link in there, and that has all of the webinars that we've done, everything from solar rights, oil and gas rights, carbon credits, solar royalties, all types of different topics. It's a really good resource for folks that want to kind of expand their knowledge base as far as natural resources and land goes. So we'll go ahead and get into it here. Again, we're talking about carbon credits, and what we're talking about today is what we call voluntary offsets, voluntary offset carbon credits that are mostly derived from land and landowners, especially. What I think can be confusing to folks is them understanding when they read a news article and they see the word carbon credits, there's two fundamentally different types of carbon credits. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to show you, just using LandGate here, what some of the use cases and options we have using LandGate. So I'm in our Power Realty module here. There's a lot of subscribers to this system on the call today, but this just goes to show you a little bit about the data and analytics that we run on land in general. And we're going to, again, focus on voluntary offsets that are tied to the surface of property. So you can see here that I'm zoomed in on a specific parcel. I think I'm in northern Georgia here. Doesn't matter where we're at looking across the United States. We have analytics across the country, but I'm seeing forestry cover here, the tree canopy cover. The analytics that we run is going to be derived from whatever vegetation is on that property. That's essentially what an offset, voluntary offset carbon credit is how much vegetation can this particular property sequester, because vegetation lives through photosynthesis that pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and converts that into carbon and plant food. Essentially, carbon dioxide is plant food. So that's what derives really your number and value of what potential carbon credits you have on your property. Real quick, what the other carbon credit is what we would call carbon capture, utilization, and storage. That's subsurface carbon. That's areas where someone would drill a well, similar to drilling an oil and gas well, but instead of removing volumes from the subsurface, they're injecting carbon dioxide into the subsurface. So that heavily rotates and is very similar to oil and gas minerals. And you can see it depends on where your carbon dioxide pipelines are, where oil and gas wells are, where there's CO2 emitting facilities. It's heavily dependent on the value of your property for that. But we're going to focus on carbon offsets today. And again, you're looking at just a random parcel that I clicked on right before the webinar. You can go to LandGate right now if you're a landowner and you don't have a subscription. It's $25 a month, and you can get this across the country for every parcel. But if you own a piece of property, you can actually go to your parcel, claim yourself as the owner, And we provide these same data and analytics on solar, wind, carbon, oil and gas, mining minerals, all of these types of data attributes, but it'll break down what the different species of trees on your property are, what the number of trees per acre for each species, and then the big number, how many tons of carbon is that parcel actually sequestering from a carbon offset perspective. So you can see here it's a 625 acre parcel, and the parcel would be sequestering on average about 4.8 tons per acre per year, which leads about 3,000 tons that it would sequester on a yearly basis. So that's, again, those of you who are not familiar with LandGate, we offer a massive amount of information on specific parcels, specific properties that can be very, very useful to the landowners themselves. But the reason why we have Steve on here today, real quick, looks like that's a really nice location for a solar farm. I had no clue, but there's a substation transmission line there. But we'll kick it over to Steve here. And what Steve's doing is very interesting. Again, like I said, there's been a bit of a bottleneck in the carbon offset portion for landowners, essentially. It's very difficult to get your property in a carbon program and then get that monetized, get paid off of those carbon credits. So Steve is involved with a company that is very interesting, and I'm going to go ahead and let Steve please introduce yourself, introduce your company, and kind of tell the folks about what it is you do, because we're talking about new options for carbon credits, and I'm guessing most people haven't heard about your company yet.
Yes, thank you, Craig, and thanks everyone for attending. Just a quick catch up on how we got to verified credits and why we set up the company as it is. My partner, Christopher Miser, and myself are investors, and we have an investment fund. And part of that fund over the last 3 years, we were looking more and more at incubating climate tech. And as we went into that industry, different areas of enhancing the environment or protecting it, carbon credits obviously kept coming up over and over again. So we started to focus on carbon credits. And when we talk about carbon credits on the surface of your land, those are called nature-based carbon credits in the industry as the standard name. And what we saw in nature-based, literally worldwide, is that the landowner would sell their credits unknowingly, probably to a brokerage network. And let's say they got, $5 for that credit, they would see that credit come out the other end in a couple, 3 months at $30 or $40. These are historical prices that I'm generally quoting you. And that landowner didn't get to participate in all that profit. They still got their initial $5. We thought that was very unfair. There are huge land tracts owned by indigenous people who put that money to great use. It is part of their income, et cetera. So we developed a more fair system to let that landowner participate in the price of the carbon credit. So we developed an area where we can hold those credits like in a bank, if you will, just like you hold money in the bank, to see where the market's going and protect them so that they're always available and under the control of that landowner, depending on when they want to sell them. The other thing that we saw in the industry is that preservation of existing nature-based assets or credits or plants was not a common theme in how carbon credits were monetized within the industry. So we are interested in LandGate because that is what they're telling us in their reports. They're telling us what exists today, and then we jump in and look at how we can preserve it in negotiations with the landowner. So our company is Verified Credits. We are a registry and an exchange, and I'll explain what those two terms mean. A registry means that your report comes from LandGate, then Verified Credits applies the report to the underlying methods, and basically what we're saying, did LandGate follow the methods they have established to come up with the number of carbon credits on that property. So we go into that process. And that's only one leg of a three-legged stool, if you will, because the carbon credit not only has the mathematical calculation of the number of carbon credits on there, it needs perspective for the buyer. So the buyers are looking at three major issues. What environmental impact does it have if I buy your credit? What social impact does it have if I buy your credit? And what economic impact does it have if I buy your credit? You know, looking to these as positive impacts. How am I helping out nature, and how am I helping out the people, et cetera? And if you're making a money on it, where's that money going to be spent? So we are the we develop a story and methodology around that carbon credit or around that property, so that there's a complete package and understanding when it goes out to the market as to what that company is helping. Because every buyer has a problem they need to solve, and they need to match the carbon credit and the story and the social and economic impacts to their goals. So when we look at carbon credits, we have a whole definition, multiple definitions of what buyers want with many nuances. And then we have a whole bunch of different aspects of a carbon credit, depending on what that story is. So then it basically becomes a little bit of a match game. So as a registry, we verify the credit data and methodology. Then we send it over to get certified to IGE, and IGE is a UN ECOSOC level NGO, and they certify our work. So they look over our shoulder as an independent auditor, if you will, and certify that everything that we said we believe to be true is true. So at that point, we then assemble a complete package for that carbon credit, and that's the registry part. Registering that carbon credit, minting it, if you will. And then the next step is that we list it on our exchange for sale. And that does a couple of things. It gives a public forum where people can go look for carbon credits that may be of interest to them. In addition, we're proactive, and we know to some extent certain buyers that have certain criteria and are interested in nature-based credits. We also have an enhancement program, and here's where some unique things come in, not only to the first unique aspect of what we do and what LandGate does is we both have a high level of interest in nature-based preservation. In other words, our goals together are what can we do to keep people from cutting down trees, bottom line, right? Or clearing the land. That's our first goal. Our second goal is understanding, how that can be monetized and move it through that process. So as we go through the process, we understand that combinations of credits can enhance the appetite, if you will. So there are credits from other types of things that are not nature-based. There are gas and oil, chemical, solar you've heard of, wind power you've heard of. There's all these different credits, aviation credits. Last count, I think there's probably about 25 to 27 different types of credit definitions. So we take some of those different high level, high impact, high value credits, and we mix them with the nature-based credit, and we create a super credit, if you will. So then one credit may be made up of a percentage of nature-based and a percentage of another kind of a credit that when that credit is minted, it reflects a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emission, which is significant. Particulate matter, methanes, all of those things that impact human health. So then, as one example as to how we look at marketing super credits is that a super credit preserves the natural sequestration of carbon. And with that little add-on, it helps human health because that super credit is made up of a percentage of two different kinds of credits. This is not completely unique in the industry, but we understand its high level of acceptance and interest at many levels, from direct to consumer all the way to institutional. And we see that combination of preservation and high impact GHG, or greenhouse gas is GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, as a not only a expanding, very rapidly expanding category, but a high level of interest. And it helps both credit types, because you're no longer in category A or category B, the nature-based credits or the GHG refrigeration credits, or petroleum credits or something like that, which are very very vertical markets. So now we're spreading that out, creating that interest, and that's our goal. We as we go through the credits, we have a process in place as to how we bring those into our system. And we have another company that we deal with called Atmosphere. And Atmosphere is the company that you'd be talking to initially. They will be going through the process, defining the process, getting the paperwork in line, understanding your report, putting everything together. Oh, and I see Haley just put up their website. So great, thank you, Haley. And that submission package, and there's a whole CRM that we use online that tracks all of our projects internally. So as Atmosphere gets everything together, and I guess you'd call them our packager, they give us that complete package. So now we have a complete package, and it says there's 3,000 carbon credits per Craig's previous example on that property. Then we go through our process methodologies that I just explained a few minutes ago. It goes over to IGE, gets certified. We finalize the entire package, which is Atmosphere's package, our methodologies, and the certification letter from IGE. Now we have the product that we can put on the exchange to sell. That's what the buyers expect. And again, part of that package is the story around it, dealing with environmental, social, and economics. So just wanted to make everyone aware that because you in fact have those 3,000 credits on your Georgia property, there is a substantial amount of work that has to be done to get it ready, because not all carbon credits are created equal. Your next door neighbor may have a better story, may have a worse story. So you're looking at matching, or we're looking at matching all of the criteria of the buyer with the existing definition of the seller.
Steve, I want to touch on that really quick. You mentioned the story of the seller. Everybody in this webinar likely is a landowner or a realtor, potentially representing the landowner. Mm-hmm. There's an article, and Steve, I'm sure you saw it because you're so ingrained with the carbon credit industry. There was an article that came out, I think it was last week. One of the world's largest registries just got themselves in a bit of hot water because the story that buyers of carbon credits were buying into didn't seem to actually come to fruition, if you will. So it was a company that was putting a lot of South American forestry-based carbon credits out onto the market, and companies like United Airlines, Southwest Airlines, whoever it is, Amazon, needing to buy these credits, would buy them thinking that they were doing something along the ESG component of getting behind something, getting behind the story, right? So knowing that everybody in this call is likely an American landowner-based type of carbon credit seller, if you will, what kind of story is there around that? Like, what kind of value is there for companies to be able to go out and say, hey, I'm helping support a farmer in Iowa with their carbon credits, or I'm helping support a landowner in West Virginia who either has the option to cut all this stuff down, or they keep their hardwoods up in the air, whether it could be in Georgia as well. But what kind of story do you see, and what kind of premium, if any, is there for American landowner-based type of folks that want to try to monetize and get their carbon credit opportunities out there? Is it something that buyers are looking for, trying to support American landowners, or is it something else? What are you seeing there?
Well, I see that there's buyers interested in supporting a very a varied number of landowner types. We have the indigenous people here in the United States that are a category almost unto themselves. We have farming as a category of carbon credits, and there are things to implement to stop leakage out of that farm, like no-till farming and different microbes in the soil and things like that can generate and amp up the amount of carbon credits sequestered that's scientifically proven on the farming side. Then we have probably the biggest outside the indigenous area, which is we're saving pasture land, we're saving scrub, and we're saving forests. And there's probably all kinds of mixtures within those definitions. But when we talk about a story, what we have to realize, and we do go into this, is that when you save a tree, you're not only saving the carbon sequestration that tree generates on a daily basis, but what birds live in that tree. And then if you take away that tree, you've diminished, species of animals, species of birds, species of insects, all of which affect the soil type, moisture, and composition. If that goes away, in addition to the tree leaving, you've taken away a complete ecosystem right down to microbes that live on that ecosystem. If you go into a jungle in Central or South America or anywhere in the world, that's a healthy ecosystem. It's figured out how everything works together perfectly, and everything we see in there is there for a reason. Whether it's a snake, a lizard, a bird, a mushroom, makes no difference. It's all there for a reason. It all helps. So what we understand is by not cutting it down, the environmental impact is much greater than what we see by cutting down the tree. And we go into that type of impact. Social impact, then, because if we're talking about a super credit, now we have GHG reduction in addition to the sequestration asset being maintained. So now we're starting to talk about human health. That's a real impact. Proven, there are hundreds of reports that talk about GHG in human health, and 30 plus common afflictions and diseases that aggravates and causes. And economics are, what are you going to do with the money? Are you just going to put the money in your pocket and it's another income stream? Are you going to participate in forest management on your own property? Those would be two general examples of, a good case and a bad case. Because for forest management and how you deal with that and how you maintain it, and we define all that. We talk to the landowners and say, okay, here, what about, well, I'm already doing that. I hear that a lot. Well, we already do no-till farming. We already have forest management. We do this, this, and this. So, most of the landowners I've talked to are responsible, and they understand, because they are large landowners, how to take care of their land. So all of those things go together to show the entire provable impact. And that's very important. We never want to say anything that we think to be true or that we believe could happen. If we don't have a verifiable opinion from multiple sources that are well recognized, then we're not going to make that claim. And I think that's the important part. The challenge with nature-based is the accountability for how much carbon that tree or that forest really is sequestering. It's not an exact science. It uses different methodologies that make assumptions from surrounding land. And that's where this company you're talking about got challenged because of some of the ways in which they calculated it. And there are ways to mitigate most of that in understanding how everything works. And you know, what we see too is a lot of this information is really a range, an acceptable range of performance of sequestration. So what we don't do is we're not going to take the high level of the range. We're going to take the medium, low level, just to lessen the possibility of any challenges, because we're not going to overclaim it just to make a buck.
Yep.
You know,
I think that's important because we've had some in almost every, you know, when we teach our courses, because we do teach natural resource courses through Real Estate Land Institute and some other things, we always end up when in the carbon section of that course talking about additionality. And Steve, you and I have had some conversations about additionality, and you mentioned something earlier that I think is really important. As you said, you value and you verify the credits based on what the property is doing right now, right? Because, and I'm happy to hear your opinions about the additionality, especially in the agriculture space, because it seems counterproductive to getting good farmers and ranchers to participate in these programs. And I'll let you touch on that. But as far as the additionality goes with our calculation, and I think this goes, Charlie, I see you put a question in there about active timber farms and pine plantations down the southeast part of the country. Our calculation, how we'll run it, is what is the ground doing today? So if the ground has just been harvested, well, the carbon load, the carbon potential to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere is far lower than if you've got a stand that's 25 or 30 years old, right? So we look at what is the property doing today and what's the carbon sequestration that's coming out of it. And that's the calculations that we run. So it's really going to be dependent, Charlie, to your question, where is that stand at in its maturity phase based on, and that's going to determine how much carbon dioxide it's pulling out of the ground. But Charlie, I would like you to comment there about the additionality, especially in the agriculture side of things, because we don't factor in additionality in our calculation. If the farmer rancher is doing a good job, we're going to calculate that whatever they're doing, they're going to get the credit for it. So if you wouldn't mind, I've explained it, but I think your explanation in a few times, but I think your explanation would be good to get a different perspective. What is the additionality component for these nature-based carbon credits? And what are some pros and cons to those?
Well, additionalities are, if you had 100 acres and 30 of those acres had been deforested years ago, additionality would be you have a plan to reforest those barren acres. So meaning that you would get a growing base of carbon credits every year as that forest matures. So that's basically how additionality works. Additionality, from what we've seen in the world, is used as an incentive to deforest as an end result, because when the carbon credit industry focuses solely on additionality and gives you no credit for existing assets, it incentivizes the landowner to go deforest some or all of their property and then come back in a couple of years and say, hey, I'm going to come back here and reforest all this, and okay, great, here's a few $1 million, this is a great project. And it takes 15 to 20 years for that deforested land to get back to the point of and level of carbon sequestration that it's sequestering the day before they deforested it. So it's a net negative and slides down the carbon sequestration of that property by 15 to 20 years. It's not incentivizing and aligning the goals of the landowners and the carbon credit market. So it's got a basic structural flaw in it. And I understand that the encouragement needs to be there to give people money to reforest. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but we need to understand and take care of both preserving the existing and adding where it's appropriate. The other thing with additionality and nature-based, and this is where the other company also got into trouble, is that planting non-native plants was common, and they die, or a majority of them die. Planting the appropriate plants in soil types that don't support that plant. In other words, a plant that, or a tree that needs to have drainage on the side of a hill, you put it down in the bottom of the gully where it has higher moisture, it's not going to live, or vice versa. So there's tremendous die-off. I think the number I've read in some cases is 85% of the reforested projects around the world are unsuccessful. And that's a big deal. So
Certainly.
we can't just willy-nilly add stuff. It has to be, again, we have to understand what it is, why you're doing it. You know, are there examples of other people doing it that way, and back it up with the science, you know, the studies and reports from and there are huge volumes of science in all of these categories that are being studied by very reputable, you know, ag programs, universities, not only in the United States, but around the world, which we can take advantage of all of those things. And then as far as the agriculture carbon credits are concerned, that is a very specialized carbon credit sector. And what that sector is doing is controlling not only traffic, but farming methods and watering methods and soil health. And soil health is probably the biggest one, because literally I've seen studies where you can generate 8 to 10 times the amount of carbon credits on an acre than it had originally when you first saw it, by properly putting that soil health back into the place it's going to be. And it's not overnight. It probably takes, best case with the best scenario, a year to get it back there. So, and what's interesting too in the farming is that we all see the farmer plow his field. Well, when you plow the field, that literally releases most of the carbon that's been sequestered in that dirt into the atmosphere. It's a net polluter. For example, here in California, the almond farms, of which we have many, have been designated by the state of California as net polluters, almond farms, because of, you know, many factors surrounding those almond trees and the amount of water they use, and, you know, the assets that are used to get that fruit or that nut back, you know, into our market. So, you know, and each crop type is separate, but there are a lot of very good programs for improvement and tried and true methods by which farmers can develop cost-effective methods, meaning that it's not a net expense to them, to increase their crop yield by improving their management and the health of the soils.
Yeah, Stephen, I think the way you guys are going about your methodology with verified credits is it motivates those good, because it's the same mentality of, you mentioned, you know, a forest owner is incentivized to harvest their trees and then put it into a carbon program, and instead of having it sit with a baseline and not qualify for anything. Same thing with the agriculture side. If a farmer's been doing all of the things you mentioned, paddock grazing, you know, tilling as least they can possible for that crop. If they've been doing that for 10 years, it's very, very difficult for their property to qualify for a lot of these historic carbon credit programs, because there is no additionality. And for everybody in the meeting, in the conversation here, that's what Steve does that I've seen, and that's why he's on the webinar today, is looking at it fundamentally is from a true perspective of what is the ground doing today. And I commend you and your group for doing that, Steve, because there's really not a whole lot of folks who will give credit to the folks who are doing things correctly, if you will, for those carbon credit programs. So we'll get into a couple questions, and Steve, I'd like you to touch on this one. As far as conservation easements go, I've seen a few places where some of those folks have gotten into carbon credit programs, but what's your perspective on, let's say, land that's already in a conservation easement? What are you seeing as far as folks being able to monetize carbon credits from those?
We see it as a very difficult task, because it's already preserved. So the kinds of things that we've seen that are workable are within that conservation easement, there's that area of bare land that they would like to reforest. So in that case, additionality kind of becomes almost mandatory in that conservation process. There's another area that could work, and that is methods of increased forest management within the conservation area. But I wouldn't count on that. It's very difficult. It's like you're getting paid twice for the same thing, right? You know, it's like you have a car and you sold it to two different people, because you know, you're in that conservation easement for some concession that was received. You're there for a reason. And so whatever that transaction was positive to the landowner, and now we're looking at it again. So we're not really even preserving anything by the definition of the market. We are just kind of piling on to make money, and that's the way the market sees that specific configuration in already conserved land.
Thoughts about, so Haley, here's a comment from Haley. And I haven't heard about Joe Rogan or Oliver Stone's recent interview, but are we really making a difference there? Steve, what's your opinion about that?
I'm not quite sure I understood. Could you repeat that, please?
So Haley mentioned that apparently Joe Rogan and Oliver Stone had a recent interview, and I'm going to assume, without having seen it, which is a dangerous place to wander, that they're questioning whether or not some of these carbon credit programs are actually really doing anything. And I think to if that's the case, I mean, because I've heard this argument, I think there's a interesting debate about it. Is, you know, this ground, let's say, Steve, that again, we'll go back to the company that got in a little bit of trouble, right? And not necessarily trouble, but had some questions about what they were verifying and what people were paying for. Say there's a native rainforest, 200,000 acres down in Brazil. It hasn't been touched by any type of industrial modernization whatsoever. It's been that way for probably a couple 100,000 years, until we've, you know, or at least the last glaciation, which was been like 12,000 years ago. Someone would sit there and say, well, okay, I'm now paying to keep that forest the way it is, but nothing's changed. That those trees have still been there. The vegetation's still been there. Nothing really changes. So I think the question might be, how do you think some of these carbon credit programs could make these changes and make some differences? I think would be a better one, because I think there's some carbon credit programs that could be questionable. But I think what you've talked about, what we've always talked about, is how can you increase the ability of that soil to capture as much carbon as possible through different practices. So what's your opinion there? Do you think that some of these carbon credit programs can really make a difference of sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere?
Well, so I think it's important to revisit the carbon credit types. So in your jungle, in your Brazilian rainforest example, we're talking about what we would call preservation credits. And as we all know, we've seen the maps every year. We see the Brazilian rainforest shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Well, our job is to, number one, stop that shrinkage. So that's number one. So, you know, we can have a debate, not on this call, but we can certainly have a debate that says, if we know, you know, 20 miles around that property, everything's been reforested, that 200,000 acre deforested, and now they're, you know, a mile away, what do we think's going to happen? You know, people are doing this not for fun. They're doing it to grow food and to grow animals. This is how they live. So the obvious focus there is, let's stop them from deforesting. Let's hire them to help preserve the forest, and they make their money from the carbon credit offsets instead of and they can go buy their food at the store or however they do it in that part of the world from their neighbors. And let's stop that deforestation. It's really the same model as what's happening with the lowland gorillas. You
Hmm.
know, the deforestation put them into a little tiny canyon. So now what have they done? They've hired the poachers and the deforesters to guard and protect the gorillas, and the money from the tourism goes to those surrounding villages, and now they have a positive impact, and now the population's starting to grow again. It's kind of the same thing as that. Let's make the previous enemies our friends and find out a different way to solve the problem. It's solving the root of the problem, right? So
Agreed
yes,
completely. Yep.
so that's why preservation credits are important to us. There are probably many news media outlets, and I did not see the interview either, but uh, you know, bloggers and other people who might disagree with that because they're focused on additionality. But I still maintain it's much more important to preserve what exists in its mature form than to plant a little baby and wait 20 years. And both are appropriate. Preservation is appropriate. Additionality is important. Forest management is important. Soil management is important. All those things are important, and as is other types of methods we mitigate emissions in the air. So we're cleaning the air with the nature-based. We're avoiding putting more GHGs in the atmosphere by uses of new, innovative, ecologically friendly products in many industries. And that combination is what it's going to take. And by the way, with all this stuff we're doing, we're still losing ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, everything that we can do needs to happen. And I can tell you a success story, and it's here in California. I grew up traveling to the San Fernando Valley where my grandparents lived. And when I was a little kid, I remember going there, and the smog was so bad you couldn't see the mountains, and it would hurt to breathe. Well, California, as you know, is one of the strictest environmental states. And all of the things they implemented as far as emissions controls and the entire process, smog is almost gone there 40 years later. So we know that positive impacts and changes of habits by humans can cause improvement that we can see, feel, and touch. And
Yep.
it's not, and I don't care how many millions of acres we sign up in the program, we're still just a tiny part. Our job is not only to do it here, but to put the word out and help others to do it where they are, because we can't do it all.
Let's talk about that, Steve. So let's wrap everything together here. Uh, so your company, Verified Carbon Credits, and then there's LandGate, right? So LandGate, for the folks wanting to know, okay, well, I'm interested. How can I get involved with with a project like this? Whether it's Steve's company or some other companies out there, LandGate is an open marketplace. So let's see who made that comment there. I think it was Jacob. Yeah. So Jacob asked a question. How does your services tie into what LandGate does? So when either a landowner self-lists their property for carbon credits or solar or wind or battery storage or what oil and gas minerals, whatever it is, or a real estate agent lists that property for them, your company sees that listing. So if there's someone out there with 500 acres, let's go back to that example in Georgia. 3,000 tons relatively 3,000 tons annually of carbon sequestration taking place on that property. And I'm a real estate agent, or Jacob's a real estate agent for that landowner. And Jacob lists that property up on LandGate. Your company sees that and would then interact with Jacob. Is that right?
Well, yes, it would initially come through Atmosphere.
Okay.
The link that Haley posted up, atmosphereltd.com, I think it's in the chat. So that's the initial contact to get everything put together, the report, the stories, the process that comes back as a complete package into Verified. So we've We have to maintain arm's length between verified and atmosphere because we want it to be an independent assessment. And we have to maintain an arm's length between verified and IGE, who's our certifier. And so we have three completely independent companies here that are going through that process to make sure that we have, we have complete transparency and complete audit and verification processes at all three levels.
Okay,
So it goes
perfect.
from atmosphere to verified credits to IGE, and then verified then puts it on the exchange for sale.
And then they put that credit, which is now it's a verified registered carbon credit, where buyers from across the world really can go to that exchange and they can buy that carbon credit monetarily for either, back to that example, when does that landowner or that realtor get a monetization for that carbon credit? When did they get paid?
Well, they'd get paid on the sale
Of when
the
the
carbon credit.
when their carbon credit is purchased by a
Correct.
buyer, that's when they would get paid. And then
Correct.
I think Jacob had one more question there because we're getting pretty close to the end here. On your website, it mentions that the landowners receive 50% ownership of all the carbon credits that are created. Can you explain that in a little bit more detail so that folks understand how that works with verified credits?
Yeah, so verified credits doesn't charge any upfront fees, which is different than all the other registries. Many other registries would charge landowners thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe take 1 to 2 years to get everything done. We're not charging any fees up front, so we participate in a portion of those carbon credits as our fee.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's really good. And Steve, I'm very excited about your company in general and the process that you guys have implemented, because I think it's a much needed change from what I've seen from some of these nature-based offsets. It's a fresh look at it. I think it's a very practical view of how can you get, and that's the ultimate goal, right? And I really appreciate what you said about the deforestation in Brazil. It's not like these people are going out and slashing and burning because they're doing it for fun. It's because they're hungry. I lived in West Africa for a while, and it was horrible to see what was happening to the forest there, but it was even worse to see the living conditions that some of these people were in. So like you said, it's, how do you get to the root cause of stopping some of these these actions, and the preservation perspective of it, of kind of flipping where the monetization of it goes, is a very unique way of going about that. And I think you guys are a really key component of some great change that's going to be coming in the future.
Yes, and it just one real quick comment to that very point. It feeds into the overall world treatment of third world countries. If you're to buy any product, whether it's gold or carbon credits or anything else from Africa, for example, any country in Africa, the system is set up to where they would get less for that ounce of gold than if you got it out of Wyoming.
Absolutely.
So that whole
you're making a great point for another type of open marketplace where
that's right.
Because I owned a very small mining company in West Africa for a while, and it's a broken system where if you pull a diamond or silver or bauxite or gold out of the ground in certain areas of the world, you get a severely depressed price,
Right.
which leaves the living conditions the way they are, and they have to do what they do to survive. So, whole other topic for a different one. Maybe we can have you back on, and we can talk about mining minerals one of these days. But it's kind of a similar situation, even though you have a very historic industry and a brand new one with the carbon credits. But we're up at time here, and thanks everybody for joining. Jordan just shared the link to some other carbon credit webinars and resources we have. Steve, thank you so much for joining. I think it was very enlightening. Wonderful company that you guys are developing, wonderful process. And again, for anybody interested, to get your properties, to get your listings, your clients' listings, get your land out in front of companies like Steve's. It's very simple. We're an open marketplace. Go to landgate.com. Free listings, no listing fees, no commissions. Go ahead and get your listing up and see what the market has to say. So Steve, again, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining. You'll receive an email for this recorded webinar. And everybody, please have a great remainder of the week. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.